Well, welcome to Llanelli Wetlands down by Swansea in West Wales. Another WWT place and a very interesting one. Although, to be honest, all the birds are asleep at the moment. And today I'm going to be talking about some new tips for birds in flight photography. I say new, they're just rehashed, but I wanted to make a short video. Here are my top 5 tips and background chainsawing noise for birds in flight photography in 2025. Let's get going with number 1. There are chainsaws everywhere in the UK. Position and movement is important when it comes to birds in flight. For most bird photography, or the general consensus for wildlife photography, I suppose, is that you need to be down at the animal's level. Well, that's true for birds in flight too, but that's not on the floor, because they're not typically flying down there. Instead, standing up is great. It gives you a freedom of movement, and you need to get a bit limber for this, so cue the training montage. No, so what I mean is, freedom of movement is good, and you cannot get that with a tripod or a monopod because you're missing an entire axis of movement. You cannot move your camera like this easily, quickly at least, unless there's some sort of foot-operated pneumatic center post that I haven't come across yet. Maybe there is. But for me, hand-holding my camera gives me the best range of movement. You can move in every possible axis using all of your body and probably look like a bit of a pillock whilst doing this out in public, but it's a good technique and it works really well. Obviously, if you have some reason why you can't move like that, you have to make the best with what you have, but it works really well for me. I use this technique when I'm stood out in the middle of nowhere, when I'm in a blind like this, although this one is weirdly tall. I can't easily see over the top of this gap, to be honest. And I do the same in hides as well. Now, you do need a fairly tall window in the hide in order to be able to do that, but that's how I was shooting about half an hour ago, photographing some snipe, and I was getting some really nice results. The windows were quite tall in that area, but I will stand up inside a hide, and I feel like it gives me a really good range of movement. If, like me, you have dodgy knees and you remember the film era being the current era, then you might be too used to shooting with a slower shutter speed than necessary for action photography, because on digital cameras you need to shoot faster because they're now higher resolution than 35mm film, particularly the fast film. You do need to have a faster shutter speed, so it varies by resolution of the sensor. For a 20 to 25 megapixel camera, you should be around 1/2500th of a second for sort of medium and larger birds, so ducks, and I'd go slightly faster for small birds like the snipe I was shooting earlier. On something like the Nikon Z9, which has a high resolution sensor of 45 megapixel sensor, then you need to be faster again. 1/3200th of a second is my default, and 1/4000th is what I shot those snipe on earlier. This gets you, ideally, the head perfectly sharp, but with the tips of the wings very slightly blurry. That's what I'm looking for, to get a hint of motion, and it is very different to how you used to have to shoot. I remember shooting action on film of like 1/1600th, things like that. You could get away with it, but on these cameras, not really. When I'm out taking wildlife photos, I have my camera set up by default for birds in flight photography. 1/4000th of a second, 20 FPS, you know, all these sorts of things. It's set up for it by default. I have other function buttons if I need to take other sorts of photos, like detail photos or slower shutter speeds. It's all on different function buttons, but my default is birds in flight. If I see a bird flying, I just have to pick the camera up, start half pressing the shutter button, no back button autofocus, none of that. It's as quick as possible, so it's completely brainless, because who knows what's around the next corner. Oh my god! Now, unlike a lot of other forms of wildlife photography, having elevation can really benefit your birds in flight photography. And as you can see, I'm on a raised thing. I think it's blind. And this can be really beneficial because I like a bird against a blue sky. It's perfectly nice. But I really like a bird against a tree line. Things like that, nice and blurry in the background. Now, you do have to be careful with man-made structures. And in the distance over there, you can see a blind and another hide and another blind, and they don't look great if you get them in the background because they're very clearly man-made. But it's a really interesting technique, and if the conditions are just right and you're upwind of the birds and they're taking off in your direction, like they should be this evening, you can get some really nice angles because they're going to fly close to the ground, coming towards you, and then go up and over your position. You can get some really, really cool photos. In theory, because the only duck that's done it so far, the camera misfocused on, and I didn't get any good photos. So your mileage may vary. And finally, my top tip for birds in flight for 2025 is that cameras don't like pulling focus back. They like going from near to far. They're much better at that. Now, it varies in terms of how problematic this is for cameras by manufacturer, mostly, and by model as well. By the technology used, phase detect performs differently to contrast detect, performs differently to contrast detect on DSLRs. It's all very variable, but universally, cameras don't really like focusing on the tiny blurry bird that's exceptionally out of focus to the point where it's just some sort of blurry fluff ball in front of a nice in-focus tree line. They just don't like doing it. So between your sequence of shots, each bird you're photographing, the camera will probably drop to the background at some point. They usually do. Pull your focus back to a closer point. Now, you can do this manually, but it's very beneficial for it because, especially if you have a phase detect array on your sensor, it will focus on the closest thing when it starts focusing, and going from near to far, it's going to find the bird first. It works really, really well. Certain cameras and certain lenses make this even easier for you. So on DSLRs, some of the big lenses in particular have two buttons. You can preset a focus distance and recall it with another button. On modern mirrorless cameras, you can often set this to your function button. So on my Z9, I have the lens function button set to record focus position, and I have the record button set to recall it. And what I do at the start of the day when I'm out shooting is I press and hold the button on the lens. I focus sort of 4 or 5 meters away, somewhere like that, depending on what sort of situation I'm in. And then I record that to the record button. And then every time I've photographed a bird and it's flown past, I then press the record button and it immediately moves my focus back to the preset distance. And then the next time I see a bird and I start focusing, it snaps straight to the bird. It is easily the best improvement I have made to my birds in flight photography. I highly recommend it as a technique. Let me know how you get on down in the comments, because I don't see it mentioned all the time, but for action photography this is exceptionally useful, particularly with how modern cameras behave. Looks like it might be a kite. No, it might be a red kite actually. Very interesting. Well, that's it from me at Llanelli for the day, and it's getting harder to pronounce because I'm not a native Welsh speaker, and it's I'm quite tired now. I've had my fill of chainsaw noise for the day, and at least I got some nice photos of some snipe. I've seen some red kites flying around. It's generally been very interesting. If you have any thoughts, any comments, or any suggestions of your own, please do put them down in the comment section below. I'd love to read them. I'm trying to make some more concise videos. I've done a few birds in flight tip videos before. Hopefully this is a better length, And I have some very in-depth setup videos if you have one of the cameras that I've covered that you can go and check out if you want. Maybe those will be useful to you. But thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Hopefully with fewer chainsaws.